Kotar seemed to get angry at this, saying that he was always going out, and if he needed to be, he could get a whole neighborhood to testify to it. Even outside the area, he had plenty of acquaintances. Do you know Mashar Regard, the architect? He's a friend of mine. The room was getting darker, and the suburban streets were filling with people, and the dull sigh of relief outside greeting the moment when the street lights came on. Ryu went out on the balcony, and Kotar followed. From every nearby part of town, every evening, the lights breezed through the hum of the voices, the smell of grilled meat, and the joyful, sweet-smelling buzz of freedom. Little by little, filling the streets with noisy young people flowed into it. The great roars of invisible boats and murmurs of roses in the streets, and from the swelling crowd of the night, the moment that Ryu knew so well, that once had loved, now seemed oppressive to him because all that he knew. "Can we put on the lights?" he asked Kotar. Once lights had returned to the room, the little man looked at him through blinking eyes. "Tell me, doctor, if you were to fall ill, would you take me to your hospital?" "Why shouldn't I?" Kotar asked if he had ever happened that a person was arrested when he was at the clinic or hospital. Ryu said that it had occurred, but it was dependent on the state of the patient. "I trust you," Kotar said. Then he asked the doctor if he would kindly take him to the town in his car. The center of town was the street that had already less crowds than the light racer. Children were still playing outside the doors, and Kotar asked him if the doctor stopped the car in front of the group of these children who were playing hopscotch and shouting. But one of them had black hair struck down, the perfect pairing of the dirty face and Ryu with clear, intimidating eyes. The doctor looked away. Kotar, standing on the pavement, shook his head. His voice was hoarse and he had difficulty forming words. 2 or 3 times he looked behind him. "People are talking about the epidemic. Is it true, doctor?" "People are always talking. That's normal," Ryu said. "You're right. And when a dozen people die, they'll say the end of the world, and just what we don't need." The engine was already ticking over. Ryu was on the gear stick, and he looked out once more at the child, who was still staring at him with serious, unruffled air. And suddenly, with no stopping halfway, the child gave him a beaming smile. "So what do we need?" the doctor asked, smiling back at the child. Kotar suddenly grasped the door, and then, before hurrying away, cried out in his voice, full of tears and fear, "An earthquake, a real one." There was no earthquake, and for Ryu the following day passed merely in long trips of 4 corners of the town, discussions with his patients, families, and talks to the patients themselves. Never had he found his job so hard to bear. Up to then, sick people had made it easy for him. They had come halfway to meet him. Now, the first time, the doctor felt he was reluctant, retiring into the depths of their illness and the kind of suspicious astonishment. There was a struggle to which he had not yet become accustomed. Around 10 o'clock, stopping his car in front of the house for the old asthma patient who had always went to visit last, Ryu found it hard to raise out of his seat. He stayed there looking at the dark streets of the stars appearing and disappearing in the black sky. The old asthmatic was sitting in his bed. He seemed to be breathing more easily and was counting chickpeas and transferring them from one saucepan to another. He greeted the doctor cheerfully. "So the doctor, it's Gloria? Where did you get that idea?" "In the paper, the radio said something." "No, it's not cholera." "In any case," the old man said with a state of great excitement, "they're exaggerating, aren't they, those bigwigs?" "Don't believe any of it," the doctor said. He had examined the old man and was now sitting in the middle of the wrenched dining room. Yes, he was afraid. He knew that this was the part of town where dozens of patients were waiting for him next day, bent down over the swollen glands, and only 2 or 3 cases had lancing bilboes brought about an improvement. But most of them, it was still the hospital that he knew was hospital meant for the poor. "I don't want him to use for experiments," his wife told one sick man. "I told him, We would not be used for experiments. He would die, and that was all. The measures had to be taken were insufficient, and that was quite clear. And for specialty equipped wards, he knew what they were to do. 2 outer buildings hastily cleared for the patients. Their windows were sealed up in the whole surrounding by the cordon sanitaire. If the epidemic did not stop on its own accord, it would be deferred by the measures the local administration had dreamed up. However, the evening of local comités had seemed optimistic. The following day, the Infodoc agency had announced that the steps taken for the prefecture had been received calmly and that already some 30 patients had reported themselves. Castell phoned Rayu. How many beds are there in the outer buildings? 80. There must be more than 30 patients in the town. There are ones who are afraid and the others, the majority, who don't even have time to feel afraid. Are burials being checked? No. I phoned Richard to say we need the comprehensive measures. Not fine words, but either way we must set up a real barrier so that the epidemic or nothing at all. And he told me that he had no power. My opinion, it will get worse. Sure enough, 3 days and 2 buildings were full. Richard thought that they could requisition the school and provide an auxiliary hospital. Rayu waited for the vaccines to arrive and Lance lymph nodes. Castell returned to his old books and spent a long time in the library. The rats died of the plague, or something very similar to it, he concluded, and put tens of thousands of fleas in circulation and transmitted the infection at the exponential rate if we do not stop it in time. Rayu stayed silent. Around this time, the weather seemed stale, and the sun drew up in puddles from the last showers. By in the blue skies bursting with yellow light and hum of aircrafts and gathering heat. It was time when everything invited tranquility. However, 4 days and infection took 4 surprising leaps. 16 dead, 24, 28, and 32. On the 4th day, they announced the opening of the auxiliary hospital in an infant school. The townspeople, who up to this point had to continue to hide their anxiety behind jokes, seemed more depressed and less avoidable in the streets. Rayu decided the phone was perfect. What are we doing is not enough. We have the figures, the prefect said. They certainly are disturbing. They are more than disturbing, they're quite unequivocal. I'm going to ask for instructions to the state governor. Rayu hanged up in front of Castell. Instructions. He needs his imagination. And a serum. It will arrive in less than a week. Though Richard the prefect asked Rayu for the report in which could be sent to the capital and colony a request for instructions, Rayu included the clinical description of the figures. On the same day, they counted 40 dead. The prefect took it upon himself, as he said, to steps the measures to be taken. From the following day, it remained contemporary to declare the disease and isolate the patients. Houses of sick people were to be closed and disinfected. The relatives would be put in preventative quarantine, and burials organized by the authorities in conditions that would be described later. A day later, the serum arrived by plane. There was enough for the cases currently being treated, but not enough for the epidemic that were to spread. In reply to Rayu's telegram, he was told that the emergency supplies were exhausted and that they had started to manufacture new stocks. Meanwhile, from all the surrounding districts, springing were waving the marketplace. Thousands of roses withered in the flower sellers. Baskets and pavements and sturgeries sufficient wharfed across the town. The appearance of nothing has changed. The trams were always full in the rush hours, empty, dirty, and rest day. Teru observed the little man, and the little man spat on the cats. Grand returned home every evening to work on his mysterious work. Qatar went around the circles, and Dr. Othon, examining magistrates, was still showing off his medicine, and the old man with asthma moved his chickpeas from one saucepan to the other. One might sometimes meet the journalist Rambert looking calmly and attentive in the evening, and the same crowds filled the streets and queues extensive for outside cinemas. The epidemic seemed to be declining for a few days, then counted only 10 or so deaths. Then suddenly it shot up. On the day that the death toll once reached 30, Bernard Rieu looked at the official telegram which the prefect had held out to him saying they were scared. The telegram read, "Declared a state of plague. Stop, close the town."